All right, cool. So we're recording. All right, so I've been doing this for a year now. I've been working on a Call of Duty League stat sheet. The main goal of this stat sheet is to know how the teams are performing throughout the year. I didn't focus on the players. I didn't record any kills, any deaths, nothing like that. It's all how the teams performed on specific maps and specific modes. With time management and stuff like that, I didn't always get to watch every single match. So there might be some sleeper teams in there that I don't realize. Obviously, you've got the hype team. You've got Chicago Huntsmen, Dallas Empire, Atlanta FaZe, even Florida Mutineers. They're all very, very popular teams. But how do they perform? I mean, somebody that didn't watch Call of Duty might look at Seattle Surge and go, oh my goodness, what an exceptional year they probably had. Well, this is why I recorded the data, because I don't get to watch every single moment of every single event. And it was important for me to know how the teams are performing statistically, ignoring the hype. Because there's a lot of superstar players on superstar teams that didn't have superstar performances. So we're going to go right to it. I made a presentation to kind of lay out everything. I'm going to show you guys how I recorded the data, where I got the data from, all the above. In the bottom of the description, I'm going to include a timestamp that's going to lay out, it's going to cut to the video, to the part of the video where it's going to show how each team ranked against one another. That is like the overall goal of everything. If you want to go ahead and skip to that, that's fine. But if you don't, you're going to see how each team performed in each game mode, every single map. And we're going to talk about some things that seem really interesting. There's a couple teams that did not win at all on certain maps, or had a negative win rate on every single map in a game mode. So we'll talk about that. You guys don't have to watch that if you don't want to. Again, you can skip to the part where it just has an overview of how the team stacked up against one another in like hardpoint, domination, search and destroy. I think search and destroy is going to surprise a lot of people. I do want to go ahead and say that, but I'm going to switch over to the presentation that I made. So we're going to start off with an overview of the data. So I did all the data entry. Nobody helped me. I put everything together. I put this presentation together. This is a lot of work. I mean, this was an exceptional amount of work. I spent a lot of time double checking things, making sure that the data that I was using was correct, and also that I was inputting it correctly. There's so many things that I had to input. I was really worried that I was going to get something incorrect. And there were a couple times where I caught myself and had to go back and fix some things. I have triple checked this data. I'm not telling you that this data is 100% correct, but what I am telling you is that if there are any errors, they likely don't have a massive impact. But we'll discuss that in more length towards the end of the video. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. So this is how I recorded the data, right? So this is from Chicago Huntsmen. You can see that at the top left. I basically said, okay, so they're playing Atlanta FaZe. They're playing Hardpoint. Each map, I go through and I add, okay, how many times did they win? How many times they lose? And I would update this throughout the year. So, you know, they played each other 3 times. And Chicago, when they faced Atlanta, had a 1-2 record. Against Dallas, they had a 3-1 record. Against Florida, they never beat Florida. There's supposed to be a 0 here, but in the end, Excel just sees a blank cell and goes, okay, it's a 0. So that's why I didn't include zeros there. But you guys get the point. So that's a little fun fact that I didn't go through, and I didn't include fun facts for each team. I figured maybe I would just discuss it as we go along. There's going to be some things I'm going to miss that you guys might pick up on. If you guys do pick up on something, comment it down below. Let me know what you see. So this is how I recorded for each map. This is literally just the raw scores for every single map. And then I go in later, sorry about that. I go in later and I put it in a graph, make it all pretty, put it together for you guys. So we'll go to the next slide. We're going to start off. This is going to be every single team, every game mode, every map, every opponent. Okay? I do want to go ahead and note, these opponents here, their names, I had to do a lot of copying pasting, okay? So some of the names you might find are, so for example, I might be looking at the Chicago Huntsmen, but then it says like Huntsman right here. That's typically an error. That's probably something you're going to see if you pay attention in detail, but that's really only if you pay attention in detail. So let's go ahead and get right into it. This is the win-loss per map for Hardpoint. Okay, so the first slide of the 3 for each team is hardpoint, and the second one is dom, the third one is search and destroy. On the left here, this is going to be your win and loss for each map, and then per opponent. So you can see the only team that beat Chicago more than Chicago beat them was New York. And actually, looking at the data, I think they actually played New York the most as well. So they're 5-6. That kind of makes sense. The more you play a team, the more that team knows how you play, counters, and stuff like that. So I'm not necessarily surprised to see a 45% win ratio against New York. New York was a fantastic team the whole year. As far as hardpoint goes, it looks like Chicago played fantastic throughout the year. I do want to pull up here on the side. So out of all of the teams, I'm going to go ahead and kind of split. They are the 3rd best hardpoint team in the game. So I figured that was kind of interesting. One thing I do want to note, this is an overall differential. So this is Chicago scored throughout the entire year. They scored 3,412 points, and they lost 3,206 points. You may find that down here, this average, this number to me in the entire data, this is what's most important. It's this average. On average, how many more points or less points does a team score against their opponent? So that's what's most important to me. You're going to see discrepancies between these numbers. So you're going to see, obviously, this is 528, but this is only 9. You might see an instance where this is absurdly positive, but this is negative. And mathematically, that makes sense. Because if a team plays against an opponent and they play 100 matches, but they only win by 1 point every single time, well, then mathematically, that's going to be, a differential of 100 up here, but on average they're only winning by 1 point. So you can kind of see how that discrepancy can be created through these trends of just playing matches over a long period of time and having a lot of data. So that's hardpoint. Let's look at dom. Did well in dom. They had a 4. They never beat Florida in the dom throughout the entire year. They lost 42 more points in domination than they gained on Hackney Yard, and on Hackney Yard they also had a -2 differential. So on average, they scored 2 less points than their opponent. I know right here it says 159 and 162. That's because it's rounded. It's actually a decimal point, but I didn't really want to deal with decimal points because the data was already so ugly. So if you do see something like this where it says 159, 162, really you want to focus on here. Excel can do math exceptionally well. It's not. That's not a calculation error. It's meant to be 2. It's just the decimal points. This graph, I'm going to be talking specifics here, but this graph really just simplifies everything. You can kind of see how they did on each map. You can see down here, I know it's a little bit scrambled with the letters and the numbers combined, but they scored less on Hackney they scored less than they were scored against, meaning their opponents got more points overall than they got on Hackney. We can clearly determine here that I think St. Petrograd was Huntsman's best domination. Search and Destroy was an exceptional game mode for Chicago. I think that's very, very clear. They didn't have too good of a performance against Los Angeles, and I think it'll be very clear why once we get to Los Angeles' slide. But I'm going to try to zoom through these. I don't want to go super slow. Chicago's my favorite team, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time. I wanted to put them up front. But I'm going to kind of zoom through these because it can get a little boring just going through this data. But if you're super interested to know how these teams performed, just pause the video and check it out yourself. But I think if you've been watching up to this point, you've been paying attention, it's kind of clear, at least I think it should be, how everything's laid out. You can see that how they performed against a team, how they performed on a map. This is on average. So one thing you will notice is, to win Search and Destroy, you have to get up to 6. But a team isn't always going to win. So that's why on the wins column here, you're not going to see 6 every time. On St. Petrograd, you do. But that's just because Huntsmen were really good at St. Petrograd Search. On average, they were 26 above, 26 more rounds than they lost. And they were surprisingly, they were only the 6th best Search and Destroy team, and that's likely because of this average here being just 1. Again, there's decimals here. You're going to see a lot of 1s, but there are decimals, but the decimals will be revealed later on in the slide. Again, that's the link in the description below. Dallas, exceptional. They won the COD champs. We know that they're going to have really, really good stats. Hardpoint looks great. Cave, a little bit lacking, 33% win rate. Chicago, they only won Hardpoint 17% of the time. That's really low. I don't think many teams have that low of a win ratio against opponents unless they were like really, really bad. I guess what I should say is this ratio is rarely very low when overall they win more than they lose. It's very rare you're going to see them perform that poorly against another team. So Chicago was a good matchup against Dallas. I should mention that. 1,020 more seconds than they lost in the Hill. Cave, again, not their best map, but that's okay because they made up for it on the other maps for sure. So we're going to zoom through these real quick. Domination, 6 here. That's really good. They were the second best domination team, I do believe. We'll get to that later, though. Search and destroy. They did well. Very good in search, actually. 43 is pretty high. That's going to put them at the third best search team, I do believe. So let's keep going. FaZe, we don't expect much else here. They scored more points than they lost on every single map, and on average, they scored more points than they lost on every single map. They had a positive win ratio on every map but Hackney, and that was a 1-for-1 ratio. It was 4-4, 50%. So let's look next. Domination is pretty much the same case besides Hackney Yard. Hackney Yard seemed to give them a little bit of trouble. I know they were 8-7, but their scores caused them to kind of be in the red here. You can see that on average they scored 7 less points, and in total they got negative 101. This is Search and Destroy. We're not surprised here at all. 51, super high. They're surprisingly only the 4th best team. Again, there's a decimal here, but this is when I say that they're the 4th best team, I'm referring to that one. Again, there's decimal points. We'll get to that at the end. 51, very high. If we're referring to the overall differential, they are the highest. Seattle, this is the players on this team were exceptional individually, but they performed exceptionally horrible together. This is one of the worst stats you're going to see. I mean, negative 882 in Search and Destroy. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. On average, they scored 14 less points. Ramaza looked really good. They were good at Ramaza. They should have played Ramaza every single time, but obviously that's not the reality. They never won against London. They never won against New York or OPTIC. Very, very tough year for Hardpoint. Domination, it's better, but it's not exceptional. They never beat Atlanta. They never beat Chicago, and they only had a positive ratio on Gunrunner, but they performed really, really well on Gunrunner. I should mention that. This is the worst. This is the worst of the worst. In Search and Destroy, they had negative 51 rounds, meaning their opponents scored 51 more rounds than they scored against them throughout the entire year. On average, it was roughly a negative 2.4. I'm looking at the stats on my right side. We'll get to that later. But the negative 2 here, it has a decimal. They were by far the worst Search and Destroy team. By far. Next up, we got Florida. Florida's looking pretty good. St. Petrograd's not doing too hot on Hardpoint. But besides that, every other map looked really, really good. Cave was kind of close as far as the average goes. But up here, we can see the differential's roughly 100. That's not bad at all. So good out of Florida. I mean, good Hardpoint team for sure. Domination. This is actually pretty interesting here. 67% for these 4 teams. Domination is good. It's above average. I mean, their differential here looks pretty good, and their averages look pretty good. I know it's 8 and 10, but those could have been really close games that they lost. And in fact, I think Florida got knocked out by a very, very close game. Search and Destroy, not too good. I think that was one of Florida's really, really weak points. I think that if Florida had been, like, even just a neutral, when I mean neutral, I mean, like, if we're looking at the differential, if this had been closer to 0, they would have been a lot better. I mean, they never beat LA. They never beat LA in Search. This is where things also get really interesting. So we look at Los Angeles Guerrillas and we go, okay, they are undoubtedly the worst Hardpoint team. and I'm looking at the stats now, and they are the 12th ranked hardpoint team, and there's only 12 teams. They never beat New York. They never beat Florida. They're 0-6 against Florida. Domination, very similar. Absolutely horrible at domination. Are they the worst domination team? They are the worst domination team. And again, by a decent amount. By roughly 5, they're the worst domination team. And when I say 5, I mean on average here. On average, they score 5 less points than the second worst team in the league. Here we go to search. Search and destroy. This is going to be a stretch, okay? But this is what the stats say. LA Guerrillas are the best search and destroy team in Call of Duty Modern Warfare. The reason that I say that is not because of their map win-loss. It's because of their average. Now, I should mention that their average is probably so high because of Ramaza. And looking at the stats, they only played Ramaza once. That is the large reason why statistically, on average, LA Guerrillas are considered to be the best through this data sheet. It should be mentioned that is considered a statistical outlier. With it only being one match, and since they blowed out their opponent, that puts their differential on average so much higher. Realistically, I think we know that LA Guerrillas was not best at anything, but because they were 6-1 in that game mode and they only played one Ramaza search, I don't know who they actually played Ramaza against. If I went and did some digging, I could find it, but they beat them 6-1, and that's why their average is so high. So statistically, that's why it says LA Guerrillas are the best. But I think we all know that using intuition, we can see that that's an outlier. ROKKR had a great performance at the very beginning, but they ended up falling short. They were actually, at one point in time, they were the best hardpoint team. They had exceptional performances in hardpoint team, but throughout the year, it just got so much worse. They never beat New York. It was not a good year. I mean, it started off strong, but they did not finish strong at all. I'm sorry if you could hear my dog. She was doing the little dog thing that they do, where they like shake really quick and they move their hair, I guess. Maybe she had some nappy hair she needed to get rid of. All right, let's see. Domination. Never beat Atlanta. Never beat Chicago. They're okay. So this would be a situation here where you see where it says Minnesota. That is a typo on my part, and I do apologize for that. I don't know what team that is. I mean, the process of elimination, you could figure it out, but at first glance, I'm not sure. I want to say Seattle, yeah. So they were 2-2 against Seattle, so that's what that is. -6 domination record. In total, they ranked 6th for domination. Actually, no. Yes. For domination, they were ranked 8th. I do apologize. They are ranked 8 out of 12 for domination. Let's go to Search and Destroy. Search and Destroy, they lost more than they won by 25. They are the 10th best Search and Destroy team. New York Subliners had a great year. Overall, they scored a lot more points than they lost in hardpoint, but on average, they did not. And again, that's that mathematics situation where if you win a lot, but you don't win by much, that's how averages can be skewed. So, looking at it, they only played Cave once, and they didn't have a good performance on Cave. That's probably why they didn't play it very much. And I want to say, I'm not going to look into it, but I want to say the one time they did play Cave was before online. I don't know how much of an impact that would have had, but I figured maybe I would note that, because I did differentiate between online, but I didn't do that in the final calculations because truly I figured it might not have been fair. There wasn't a lot of LAN performances, and I really just wanted to tie all of the league performances, all the teams' performances together. In hardpoint, though, it should be mentioned, they did really well against LA, Minnesota, and I'm assuming, again, where that says New York, that is Seattle. Now, those 3 teams, besides Minnesota, those other 2 teams, I can see how that's an easy win, but Minnesota is not an easy team to beat 5 times. I figured that should be mentioned. We're going to pick up the pace here because I think the recording is getting a little long. We're almost at 20 minutes, so let's try to zoom through this. Not a very good domination team. On average, they did score 11 more points, but negative 53. St. Patrick was their saving grace for sure. They only played it once though, and that's why their average is so high. So you do have a couple of outliers there, but I figured that should be mentioned. 10-9, they played a lot of Hackney Yard. They played a lot, and they won it the majority of the time, but barely the majority of the time. Search and Destroy, not a good search team. I mean that's pretty clear. They never beat Dallas in search, but they always beat OPTIC and they always beat Seattle. Again, that is Seattle. London Royal Ravens, the 4th place team. Again, one of the things I wish I would have done on this slideshow would have been to put what they placed, and I think I meant to do that, but I forgot. I was just really eager to get this out. This has been so much work, and I'm just really excited to kind of be done with it and move on to the next year. And collecting data for the next year is going to be exciting because I don't know if I want to do all this. We'll talk about that. That'll be an aspect of the video. Domination, not the best. That is definitely their weak link. Search and Destroy, they were pretty much average. I mean, they had 0 average differential. Total differential was 18. So I mean, they were a good search team, but they weren't necessarily the best team. They always beat. Again, this should be Seattle. They always beat Seattle, but that's not hard to do. And then they always beat Toronto and Minnesota. Now, Toronto is a pretty good team, so that is pretty good. They never beat Atlanta, though. Speaking of Toronto, let's hop on board with Toronto. They are pretty average at hardpoint. I mean, -3, that's pretty close to 0. I know that they have a total differential of 51, but on average, I mean, it's 48% win rate, -3%. Average differential, that's a pretty average team. Domination, they weren't the best. Search and Destroy, again, super average. And in total, having a 2 total differential, that's absurdly average. Toronto was all around, I don't think they had a horrible year, but they didn't have a great year. And I think that, I know pro players have the mindset you win it all or you lose it all, but this was one of those teams that were just in the middle. I think we all knew they would be in the middle, and that's just the situation that they were in. Paris Legion, not a good search team. Horrible search team. Where did they rank up in total? They are the 2nd worst search team. I mean, just really bad. They never beat Dallas. They never beat Atlanta. They never beat Florida. Domination is the same situation. Gunrunner was their really only saving grace, and in total they only got 8 more seconds, or 8 more points in Dom. Search, they never played Search and Destroy Piccadilly. That is one thing that I think they're the only team that never played a map in a mode, and it's Piccadilly Search. Again, not very average, but not necessarily the best search team. OPTIC Gaming LA, high expectations for this team, high expectations for Search, and for Hardpoint, garbage at Hardpoint. Domination, we have a 200 plus total differential and a 6 plus average differential. Pretty okay domination team. Not necessarily the best, but not necessarily the worst either. So yeah, on average, decent domination team. Not the best, but not the worst either. They never beat Atlanta. They never beat New York. They never beat Dallas, and they never beat Toronto. Search and Destroy, I think we all had higher expectations for this team, but they didn't really pull through. They played a lot of Search, and in total, they only scored 2 more rounds and they lost. 0 average differential and a 51% win rate. So this is where we start what I think is the most important part of all this data and all the work that I've done. This is the total hardpoint differential for each team and the average hardpoint differential for each team. In my opinion, the average differential outweighs the total differential in importance. I truly think that when you look at the average differential, you're looking at what team was the best. Now, when we broke down each team, we talked about outliers. There are a few teams that did have outliers, and the reason that they have outliers is because the total differential and the average differential are calculated differently. The average is calculated by the average differential per map. So, if a team only plays a hardpoint map once and they win 6-1, that's going to have a major impact on their average differential, because that's a 5, right? 6-1, that's a 5, because they only played it once. As you get more reps in on a map, you're almost never going to win a map 6-1, 6-0 every single time. You're going to have those games that you lose. You're going to have games that go round 11. So that's why average hardpoint differentials can sometimes be skewed. But I think for the most part, you're going to find that the average differential is going to be the most beneficial to look at. But I wanted to include the total hardpoint differential because I think it was pretty interesting to just look at the fact that Dallas scored they sat in a hill 1,020 more seconds than their opponents throughout the entire year. To me, that's pretty crazy. And also, I figured I would include the total hardpoint differential because Florida had an exceptional year in hardpoint, and I don't think it was talked about enough. LA and Paris, god-awful. Domination. Los Angeles, horrible at domination. They had the worst total and worst average differential. New York had a really good average differential, but I should note that when we reviewed the data of the teams individually, New York did have an outlier. I think it was Ramaza Dom that they only played once, I want to say. So yeah, I figured I would mention that is an outlier. Not Ramaza Dom. It was a different Dom. I can't remember which one, but there was a domination that they played that was an outlier. Going back to this, Dallas overall, I truthfully think were the best domination team, and I say that because, well, I don't know. There's an argument to be made for Atlanta as well. I mean, in total, Dallas scored 201 more points in domination than Atlanta throughout the whole year. But you have to account for the fact that maybe they played more matches. I don't know. I don't know necessarily. It's tough to tell. Really, you take this and you interpret it the way that you want to. But I don't think the average differential is large enough to justify saying that Atlanta is better when you look at the total differential. So that's why I'm going to include both data sets, because I think a conversation can be made about both. Lastly, search and destroy. You're gonna be probably pretty stunned on the right side when you look at LA. LA played one map. I can look at the map real quick, just a second. They played Ramaza Search and Destroy. That's where that Ramaza came from. I know at one point we were playing Ramaza Dom, but that's where the Ramaza comes from. It's LA. They played Ramaza Search one time. They won 6-1. That is why the data is skewed so much in their favor for average. So I think it would be reasonable for us to look at the total differential. I think that we give search to Atlanta. I know that Dallas is an exceptional search team. Dallas is an exceptional team regardless. But I really think that Atlanta was probably the better search and destroy team in the game, with Dallas being a very, very close second, and then Chicago being a close third. That's that. That is my stats for CDL 2020. What is the next slide? What do I have over here? Okay, so errors, that's what we briefly talked about at the beginning. I'm not going to talk too much more about it. I went through the data like 3 times before I decided that this was the final data that I was going to use. Guys, if there is any error in this data, I don't think it's going to have an impact large enough to skew the data or skew the things that I said as far as who places and what. I really don't think any error is going to have a massive impact on the data, especially because there's just so much data. I mean, looking at Dallas, they had 1,000 more seconds or something like that in hardpoint than they had lost. The numbers got so large to where if one of the scores would have been inputted wrong, there probably wouldn't have been that much of a discrepancy. But again, I did put a lot of effort into making sure that I get everything correct. I looked at the Call of Duty League. I looked at reports of the scores. I looked at the streams, and I did all of that just to make sure I was getting everything correct. If I was going to make any improvements, I definitely think I would probably have not done the map count between each team. So that was the first slide where I showed you guys how I recorded the data. I don't think I would have done that. I think it was kind of unnecessary. But that's something I'm going to reflect on a little bit further. I think that I could have made things easier for myself if I just spent the time to just focus on getting everything correct. I think one other improvement I could have made, and I don't necessarily know how I would have approached this, but some way to do the win-loss, if I was going to include it, to make that process easier, because that was very, very tedious. Going and you got to record the stats for one team that won, and then you got to go and do the team that lost, and everything's reversed. It got kind of complicated. I don't know if I could have wrote like a program that would have allowed me to visualize the scores, and then I would have been able to input it. I'm really not too sure. But that is something I would have done to improve the way that I recorded the data. For next year, this is what I'm most excited for. This is why I did all of this. This is why I'm getting this video out today, a day after Champs. Champs was yesterday. Today is Monday. It's the 31st. I'm so excited for CDL 2021. They actually just announced a few hours ago that it's going to be 4v4, so that makes things even more exciting because roster mania is going to be crazy. Yeah. Whole team performance is what we're going to focus on again. We're going to focus on every single team and how they perform as a team. I don't want to do players. Players seems like just too much work, just way too much work. I think one thing I do want to do differently is I want to show how a team performs over time. I definitely think Minnesota have been very interesting to look at. Like, they start off the year very strong, but then throughout the year, if I had done a graph on their average of hardpoint, it probably was the most linear decline possible. I mean, that's what I want to focus on for next year. I want to focus on how teams perform over time. And I may switch to Google Sheets. I know this doesn't impact you guys very much, but it might make things easier for me, and it might also allow me to share my data more frequently and have like a link that people can look at if they're ever interested. Obviously, I want to improve the layout. I want to improve like the design of things. I want to make it more visually appealing for me to input the data. I think I'm going to probably remove the opponent map count for like the modes. I don't necessarily care how many times Atlanta beat Dallas on Ramaza search. That didn't play a role in my analysis very much, and I don't think it was a lot of stress to input, and I don't think it was worth it in the end. One thing I do want to include are CDL points. I didn't include like the tournaments that they won. I didn't include how many points they had after each event. With the new per event data entry that I'm going to try to focus on for CDL 2021, I think the CDL points will be a good route for me to, or not a good route, a good thing for me to include in the new data set. And then lastly, I want to include roster changes. So if a team makes a major roster change, for example, when Chicago dropped Gunless and picked up Bristini, to me that's a major roster change. They're two significantly different players. So it would be interesting to me to see how the team improved or maybe lacked in certain game modes after that transition and after that roster change. Lastly is suggestions. I want to get some cool ideas. My main focus is unique data entry. I want my data to be very, very unique. I want some fun facts, but I want them to be team focused. I don't want it to be like, I really want minimal individual player data. I thought about doing like, what team gets the most first bloods and who gets the most first bloods. But while I think that would be cool, I don't really want to focus on the players. I want to focus on the teams. I want to focus on the head-to-head matchups to just see how teams perform against one another. And the biggest thing for me is I want my data to be meaningful. If I do include a fun fact, I want it to be meaningful. If I do what team wins the most round 11s, to me that's like somewhat meaningful because that's a clutch factor and that's a real aspect of teams. So yeah, if you guys have any suggestions, message me, comment below. The majority of people that are going to be watching this are probably my friends, so message me if you guys have any cool ideas. If you sat through all of this and you watched every team, you're the best. That's awesome. I put a lot of work into this. If you didn't, that's perfectly okay too. It's a lot of boring numbers. And I feel like you really got to care about the Call of Duty League to have sat through all that. But that's my work, man. I'm really happy that it's all over. I'm really happy that I got all of it done. I'm really excited to make the next one. I'm gonna start that soon. I'm gonna maybe take a couple days and give myself a little bit of a break because I've been putting in data a lot here recently, catching up. But I've got some cool ideas that I mentioned earlier as far as how a team progresses, and I got a few cool ideas of how I'm gonna implement that, how I'm gonna record that. So yeah, I mean, that's it. I'm happy to be done with it. But yeah, if you guys want more of me, I know I don't post a lot of YouTube videos, but I stream quite often. I'm at home because of COVID, and I'm not at school. School is going to be done online. So I'm going to have a good amount of streaming time. I'm going to be live. I might be live right now if you're watching this. Link is in the description below. I really appreciate you guys looking at this video. I know it was 35 seconds long. I know there was a couple hiccups throughout the video, but I really appreciate you guys watching it. So I'm going to see you guys later. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.